So next we've got the panel. So I hope that Edwina, Imane, and Clara will all come back. Oh, we've just lost Imane. And have the panel. So we do need you to post questions that you think will be interesting and illuminating into the Q&A area. But before we do that, Molly, who is on the panel and hasn't given a presentation, I'll give her a brief chance to speak in a second, but I'll just introduce her first. So she was the Green MEP for the southwest of England and Gibraltar from 2014 to 20, and is a professor of economics at Roehampton University, as well as economics and finance. Molly is also interested in renewable energy, trade, food, farming, cooperatives, and mutuals. She studied PPE at Oxford and has a PhD in economics from the University of Wales, and has written several books on green economics, the environment and the economy, and bioregional economy, as well as many academic papers. She's our next candidate for the House of Lords. We appear to have lost Molly too now. That's worrying. In an interview for Bright Green, she said Greens are the only party advocating for genuine transformation of the economy, and that coronavirus pandemic has opened up a space for an increasingly open radical policy. As we've lost Molly, this gives us a slight problem.
Can you see me? I can see you.
Oh, sorry, I can see you. We haven't lost Molly. I apologise. So Molly,
other
over
people
to you.
can see me, I think.
Yeah, apology, my mistake. So Molly, over to you. You've got between 5 and 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Tom. Well, I've tried to condense everything I've done over the past 20 years into 5 minutes, so I probably won't go longer than that now, because I've stripped everything out and just chosen what I think is the most important stuff. And so I've just limited myself to 3 points. The first point, which obviously you take very strongly from the model of the donut, is the idea of that the economy has to sit within limits. And we've already discussed that and why that's difficult for a capitalist economy to do. And there's been quite a lot of work around over the past sort of 10 years or so around this idea of flourishing within limits and seeing that as a sort of challenge and an opportunity rather than seeing a limit as something bad. And I think that's something we've all learned to do actually during the lockdown. We haven't had the world as our oyster, but we've learned to really appreciate the things we have closer to us. So I think there's ways in which we can really make progress with this new way of thinking about economics. But the challenge to it is that if you say something like that to somebody that sees themselves as a socialist, they will say, well, why shouldn't everybody have a chance to have what the richest people have? So obviously, once you put a limit, then you're talking about how you're going to share what's within that boundary. So the question of equality comes up straight away. But many will then respond by saying, yeah, well, so-and-so's got a yacht. Why shouldn't I have a yacht? And that is encapsulated in the title of a book called Ferraris for All, which, there was a sort of thing I was taking on. I think it was published about a decade ago, because that is an argument we need to defeat. And yes, it's a challenge to say why, but it also gives you the opportunity to say that staying within the planetary limit also requires much greater levels of equality than we have now. And the other issue with limiting growth is that particularly at a time when you've got a lot of debt, as we have at the moment, growth can enable you to pay off that debt. And so we hear from Annalisa Dodds, the Labour Shadow Chancellor, that it's important, and Gordon Brown, in fact, that it's important that we grow because we need to pay off that debt. So just to set that idea of limits within context, you can reframe lots of things, and you can reorganize money, as I'm going to say, but you can't reframe the national public finances. And so there is a lot of work that needs to be done rethinking in terms of what happens in the Treasury. My second point is, regardless of what happens nationally, you can do a lot locally. And so I've really enjoyed listening to people who are talking about applying the learnings of the donut economy at the local level, because that's something where we can definitely achieve big advances. And Greens obviously believe in a local economy and stronger local economies and stronger identification with local places, in a way as a substitute for the energy intensive lifestyles of the current economy and in fact society. And I think something else we've learned from COVID is that actually those lengthy supply chains that we relied on might not be as resilient as we thought. And of course, that's something we're going to have to stress much more as climate change really begins to bite, because we're going to see extreme weather events. Actually, we'll see this with Brexit as well in January. And as people question those lengthy supply chains, reshoring production is actually something that achieves a lot of benefits in terms of reducing the impact that our economic organization has on the planet. And Tom mentioned that I've written a book about bioregions called the bioregional economy, which is a way of thinking about what we mean by local economies. And you can see behind me, I live in Stroud. I'm a proud Stroudie. Obviously, it's a very nice place to live. But one of the things we try to do here is really celebrate the locals, celebrate our connection with place, celebrate the 247 varieties of apples that we have in Gloucestershire, have festivals to celebrate these things, and really get the benefit of being embedded in a local place. And again, I think during COVID, people learned about the green spaces close to them and really came to value them in a different kind of way. And to me, that's a key part of what we mean when we talk about flourishing within limits. And lastly, and a slightly more mind-blowingly, and of course, I've now got a minute and a half to tell you about this, money and debt is a key issue, because why is it? We've taken it as a sort of axiom of this economy that it has to grow. And that is largely to do with the way the finance system is designed. So if you design a system where people can make money, where banks actually can make money and through debt, then effectively people will then have to work to repay that debt, and they'll have to generate economic activity to repay that debt. And that is, in my view, one of the key pressures for growth. So we can't actually live within this circle of security and circle of safety for the planet without addressing the way the money system's created. And I wanted to refer you to Positive Money, who are doing some really excellent work educating on this issue. And we need to move towards a system where instead of private banks creating money for profit, we create banks as a public good. And that's something that the Green Party has as our policy, but it's also something that Positive Money is lobbying for. And one of the things we can do before we get that policy actually introduced is make sure that the criteria governing how that money can be created and pushed out into the economy have the criteria include the need to stay within planetary limits. And that's something that we're lobbying Treasury and Bank of England about at the moment. So at the big scale, I think there are issues we can address about money and finance that are very important, as well as the local work we're doing. So if you've sort of got the bug now with economics, which I really hope you have, because I think it's a fascinating subject myself, then I just send you a little suggestion that you might investigate some of that work by Positive Money and help to see the bigger picture of finance and help lobby to improve the way money works, so it works for us and doesn't destroy the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie. That was great. So if Edwina and Imane and Clara would like to come back in and turn your videos back on, we can start the panel. So what I think is quite an interesting question is from David Jones, is if you were starting in a new city, so a new city was being built, and I guess that might perhaps particularly apply in Cambridge, where I think they want to build a new one between Cambridge and Oxford, what would you do differently and what would you keep the same? So why don't we start with you, Clara?
Well, I'm not on the committee to make decisions, but what I think should happen is start with better and stronger housing standards that for at a minimum be so maybe not passive house, but similar to passive house, emphasis on keeping them with thinking about the carbon output and designing to be carbon zero not as much as possible. It should be carbon zero. We know this. We know it's a need now. So decisions should be more aspirational, like where we know we should be. It depends what's required from the town, I guess. There's a lot of there's thoughts about developments in North Cambridge. They're building, I think that there was 8 new centres of this whole, it's a 20-year plan. So it's a nice sort of big scale of planning. And there's more thinking about management of rainwater, not plugging into the sewage system so much, or of course it is, but management of rainwater on runoffs, green corridors, biking around and all the rest. So there's some really good ideas there. I probably need to spend more time in it to, I commented a lot on the plans. But yeah, if you're starting again, start from what you want from the people that live there. Actually talk to the people that are planning to be there. There are certain things that shouldn't be top down, that you need to come to agreements with the people that are the using of those towns that live there.
Okay, thank you. Molly.
So the first question to ask is how many people makes an ideal size of settlement? And that's obviously been discussed a lot by Greens and by Green economists. And obviously I think Stroud is perfect. It's actually only 15,000 people. But, you know, cities have real drawbacks when it comes to making them net zero. They have some advantages as well. So you can organise a better public transport system in a city and reduce people's use of cars and other CO2 producing vehicles. But in terms of just provisioning, they're very energy intensive because goods get sucked in from right across the world and waste gets pushed out. We heard Kate talking about that in the film. And so smaller settlements, in my view, are more easy to make sustainable. And the settlements that we live in at the moment are largely a consequence of us having a vast amount of free energy because of the discovery of petroleum. And it's a bit like I'm having my house retrofitted here, and my house is Victorian and it's designed to run on coal. So it makes absolute sense to have drafts coming in through the window to keep the fire going, the smoke goes up the chimney. Coal was cheap, you just kept the room warm, didn't matter that you had drafts. Obviously we need the opposite of that now because I have to get the whole place heated with a heat pump. And so I think we need to rethink cities in a similar kind of way. And actually, this is something else where COVID is really pushing us in that direction, because people are going to be inhabiting different spaces. And some parts of the world and some parts of our country are easier to re-inhabit comfortably in a net zero carbon world. So I think we should, you know, make sure that we think sufficiently big when we're asking those questions. And in terms of how you redesign habitations or living communities, there's some really good work that Herbie Girardet did that I always rely on, and he talks about the movement from Petropolis to Ecopolis. So Petropolis is the kind of city I'm talking about, heavily dependent on energy for goods coming in and out, and networked right across the world, even for most basic commodities, such as we discovered, PPE coming from China. Whereas the Ecopolis, you try and get everything you need from within your town or city and its immediate hinterland. And if you look at his really nice diagram of Ecopolis, it's effectively the community in the center. Then what we now think of as the green belt is an area where you grow food, and then beyond that you have an area where you have your wind turbines and you're producing energy, and you also, then beyond that you have wild spaces for, you know, to provide habitats for biodiversity. So that seems to me a perfect model for how a human community should be. But obviously we need to imagine the transition from where we are now to living in that future. And the reason I live in Stroud is that we try and do a lot of that work now, like setting up community supported agricultures, communities that have, you know, community wind turbines that provide them with electricity, maybe a local grid. But, you know, that's a key question, because the way we're living at the moment is where we've come to after 200 years of industrial revolution and 100 years of depending on petroleum. And we need significant and major redesigns of urban living in order to be net zero.
Thanks. Edwina, if you're there. No, or Imane.
Yes, I am here. Sorry,
right.
Come back.
Right. So did you hear the question or not?
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Okay, I will just, if you were starting the process again by starting a new city, what would you do differently from the current cities, and what would you keep the same?
Okay, so I actually went to Amsterdam on a planning study trip in 2013, and I was really impressed by Amsterdam's approach against really difficult odds with not having much land. So from what I could see, that their approach was something that I think we should aspire to. And they had a master plan that went back to the 30s, as far as I could see, and it had green fingers that reached out through from the city centre. So I think the principle of that is a gentleman called Ebenezer Howard. I would ask people to read his book because I think it's really interesting, and it's about garden cities. So the principle is that you build around green infrastructure first, and you think about what people need. I guess you think about the hierarchies of needs, so that housing does come into that. But I think you think about how do we provide for nature, creatures and the ecosystems with us in it. So it's starting with green infrastructures. That's how I think starting point. I think we've got a lot to learn from Amsterdam, who I think have updated their master plan now as well. So good example.
Thank you. Imane, would you like to add anything?
Well, I want to say thank you for the compliments first, of course. And well, also we did update, of course, that plan because we want to add biodiversity as well to that plan, because it isn't just about green, but also what kind of green. And another special thing we've added as well is animals in the city, because we also house a lot of animals in the city. So we think about nature in a different way, not just for use of the people who live in Amsterdam, but also nature in itself. Like, how can we give nature their own place in the city? So we are actually right now the most animal-friendly municipality of the Netherlands, and also one of the most biodiverse. So that's very special. I think if we could start over, I would start over with a lot more money, but we don't have it. So that's one. But because sustainability and building a donut economy and a circular economy costs money, it's an investment, but the return is huge. And I really hope as a society, we see return not only in profit, but also in the well-being of people. And I really hope that is something we will value also when we look at the COVID crisis and the economic crisis and also the climate crisis, is that the well-being of our city, of our people, but also of nature will be put first. So that's what I would like to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so somebody, Michael Hallam, has asked, there's a sort of need for some green growth to roll out solar sustainable infrastructure. How can that overlap the transition to new well-being, healthy maintenance economy? So you're building green whilst the new narrative is forged in all local communities. Do you see this as a realistic strategy, and how do you do it? I think that's probably one for you to start with, Molly.
I was just organising some notes because there's so much to say about this. Look, the thing is, we can't afford to obsess too much about growth, degrowth, how much growth, that kind of thing. And also then we get this suggestion of green growth, and that's usually by people who are going to profit from this so-called growth. So what I try and do, instead of getting into that, what can be quite a sterile argument, is focus on quality of the economy rather than quantity of the economy. So, you know, we don't need to fetishize growth by saying, yes, calling it green, reacting against it, any of those things. We just say what we're going to do is focus on what we need to do, what we need to change in our communities in order to be able to live comfortably in a net zero way. And so yeah, so lots of work needs to be done, and that's lucky, isn't it? Because there's massive unemployment coming because of COVID and loads of people losing their jobs. So what we need is what we call a green recovery plan or a Green New Deal. And for example, retrofitting is the most important thing that needs to be done because we've got terrible old drafty houses in this country. So we need the government to invest vast amounts of money retraining people who've lost their jobs and sending them out to all the communities across the country to retrofit people's homes, and plus upgrade the grid, electrify railways. Load of work needs to be done. And actually that will create growth. In the short run, that will create growth. Sorry, I'm going to play an economics trick now and say it depends whether you're talking about the short run or the long run, but it really does. It really does, because in the short run, we do need to do that. And that's good because we've got a massive recession coming. But we can, instead of going into that recession, we can use this time, public investment through government created money to create those jobs in all the communities. So by the time we've come out of this post-COVID period, we're a sustainable economy, and then we won't need to be such a large economy. Because we won't need to do all that work. And that's the point about money. If money's created in order to fulfill need rather than in order to generate profit, then you don't need to have that constant pressure for growth. And you can start withdrawing money from the economy by taxing more once you've achieved what you need to do. But at the moment, you know, if you create those jobs in all the communities, then there'll be multiplier effects as well, because like somebody who's paid to retrofit my house is going to go out and spend his money in a local shop, and then the shopkeeper will spend it in the pub and all those kinds of things. And the point is about the Green New Deal, it happens everywhere. So it's not just like finance, which happens in the city and somebody gets a yacht and goes to Bermuda and puts their money in a tax haven. It's bound to happen in your community. So the knock-on effects will be there as well. So that's the main thing. But there is another thing to say, which is a lot of the industries we have at the moment are completely counterproductive, like people sitting on phones telling other people to buy things they can't afford, or people advertising for other people to fly off to Japan to enjoy the cherry blossom festival, which I've got really irate about last spring. It's like, there's cherry blossom in my town. Anyway, sorry, but you know, that a vast amount of stuff like that, in my view, should be just eliminated. And I'm afraid I'm quite happy as a Green Party finance speaker to say ban adverts for energy intensive products. Why are you encouraging people to fly more than they need to or buy a 4x4? So yeah, I think we do need some action like that as well to stop the destructive growth. But actually there's a hell of a lot of economic activity we do need to stimulate, both because we need to go through the sustainability transition very rapidly, but also because we need to make sure that there's not massive unemployment after COVID.
Okay, Lukas, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sorry for being away for a little bit. I didn't actually hear the question, but I can probably infer it from most of the stuff that Molly has said. And I don't want to add much. I think I generally agree with what Molly has said. I think there is a case to be made to push the argument that growth is not important, and the way we're doing it at the moment, because there will be a point when policymakers have to make a decision to prioritize something else over growth, like they had to do with the pandemic. And at that point, they need to be able to make that decision. And I think that will be especially around the part where Molly said, where we have to shut down or reduce specific industries, or we have to shrink markets, and there will be lots of businesses whose business model will not be profitable anymore if we are seriously about tackling the climate emergency. And I think that's why it is unproductive to constantly have this argument about whether green growth is possible or not, because you can't prove it either way. So you can waste a lot of energy on that. And it's all about making sure we get the right kind of economy. But I think you need to make sure that that the priorities are clear. So if there is a trade-off between growth and the environment, we have to go for the environment. And there might well be these kind of trade-offs coming up.
Great, thanks. Edwina, it's probably, or perhaps possibly one that particularly affects Cornwall, as you said, it was the most deprived local authority or something, I forget what term you used, in Europe, and therefore you might be particularly concerned about this sort of idea. What's your...
No, really concerned about that. I mean, I agree nearly all of what Molly said. I think there needs to be a culture change. As she suggested, do we really need all that stuff? You know, why are we working our butts off to bring stuff from the other side of the world that actually we don't really need? So I think we need to look inwardly about, do we need all that stuff? And I think we need there are reasons to be hopeful and reasons to be cheerful about that, because I think there has been a bit of a sea change in that ethos with the pandemic. Awful that it is. I think there are some silver linings, and an example of that in Cornwall Council, 4,000 of our staff are now working from home, or certainly from a local hub. They're not, I think we're saving, I think they said it was something like 42,000 commuting miles a day have been saved by that, just switching it off, just stopping. We were on that trajectory before the pandemic, but it's accelerated enormously, and our plans have accelerated enormously. I think we perhaps could do with having some different metrics for what success is, and I quite like the happiness quotient. I think measuring how happy somebody is, or that measuring their well-being, is a far better metric than how much dosh they've got in the bank, or what stuff that they've got. I think environmental growth is really important, and Cornwall was the first local authority to create, with our nature partnership, environmental growth strategy. That was in 2016, and that's pretty much embedded across the piece now. Yes, there's always challenges to that, and we've just been approved as a nature recovery zone. So we're mapping all our landscapes, and I think that a bit like the decision-making wheel, where it makes you think about the impacts of what you're doing. I think us mapping our habitats and the role and the ecosystem services that nature provides with us will concentrate the mind a bit better on what's important. I think there does need to be a new economic model, one that's more circular rather than lineal, and more regenerative in nature. So if you do take something out, then you have to balance that out in some way. I think the 3 projects that Cornwall have been concentrating on since the climate emergency is retrofitting homes. I agree with Molly that's really important. But at the same time, we're doing a climate emergency development plan document, which is part of the local plan suite of documents, because we want to stop and make sure that the homes we are building now aren't the retrofitting homes of the future. And the other is the Forest for Cornwall. So a massive tree planting campaign is going on. I'm not sure that we're there at the moment in with the current government's thinking. I think there's quite a lot of greenwash going on. I think that Boris on one hand, the Prime Minister on one hand saying build, 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 and on the other hand, talking about nature and climate change as being important. I'm not sure the two are compatible in that model. The economic model, or the whole ethos, has to change. You can't fiddle with a bit over here. I think you need a new set of eyes to look at the thing as a whole.
Great, thank you. Imane.
I was listening and now I forgot the question.
The question was about whether green growth, or how green growth fits in, because you need green growth to, for instance, for sort of building the solar infrastructure, the sustainable infrastructure, retrofitting houses and so on. But
Yeah.
if you're sort of thinking about also limiting the size of the economy, how do these relate to each other, and is this a realistic strategy?
Well, I think it's not only a realistic strategy, it's also a necessary strategy, because when we look at housing and the future in housing, and I can mostly speak about big cities, our homes will be smaller. So the environment outside of the home, it's going to be like a second living room. You have to treat the environment as a second living room. So green will be an important part of it. So instead of thinking of, okay, how green when it comes to costs, when it comes to housing, when it comes to the need for more houses, then I think it's important to understand that green also has a very important, how do you call it? Is very important for the city as well, because we need to treat it as a second house. Look at parks, look at the beneficial things when it comes to the children, but also the elderly. We need to go outside. And when it comes to COVID crisis, you see how important it actually is to be able to get outside of the house. So it's not only realistic, but a necessary thing to take in within your policy and within your future plans.
Okay, thanks. And Clara.
So I just really wanted to reiterate something that Molly said, is money is to fulfill the need. Wouldn't it be great if money was created to fulfill the need instead of generating profit? So the initial green growth that is required to retrofit houses to make sure that everybody can thrive on less should be in preparation for what's to come, to make sure that we're not, we break the addiction of an ever expanding economy that we've reframed, and we no longer have GDP as the signifier of success for growth. But yeah, absolutely transitioning over to well-being and happiness and sustainability, and making sure that we're not breaking our essential existential support systems. So yeah, it's green growth is so we don't have to grow anymore.
Thanks. I like that, green growth so we don't have to grow. There've been a sort of couple of questions coming about universal basic income. So I think it might be interesting to ask, is universal basic income necessary to achieve a donut economy? And can it, because obviously we've got people from local places, is it something that can be done locally, or is it something that has to be done nationally or worldwide? Imane, would you like to start on that?
Well, we're actually having a discussion with
yeah. I'm afraid we can't.
About basic income. Me personally, I'm a big fan. I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Tom?
Hello?
Yeah?
Right.
Can you hear me now?
I can now, yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. So we are having a discussion within our national political party because of the upcoming elections about basic income. Me personally, I think basic income is very important when you look at the results of different places that they've implemented basic income, and you see what kind of positive outcome it has, and also it changes the way how people look at the economy. So I think it's very important that we at least discuss it, a basic income. I think it should be a part of at least the conversation. I know, but at the same time, I also know that not you need to get everyone on board, and not everyone is on board when it comes to basic income. So let's start with introducing it, I hope, because I think locally, if you implement basic income locally and that way prove how what kind of positive outcomes can come from basic income, then you can move it to a national policy. And like I said before, municipalities are always ahead of national policy. So who knows? Who knows?
Okay, thanks. Edwina.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I'm a supporter of universal basic income. It's also Liberal Democrat policy. so we can agree on that. Some of the research that I've seen is it's suggesting that it can improve well-being, not just your mental health, boost confidence. I think it also would benefit women, particularly if there were carers, and valuing carers as well. You know, it's my husband were carers for both my parents for a long time, and it did cause us some hardship. I was happy to do it, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't want it any other way, but I think it could act as a bit of a sort of safety net for people, and particularly the people that are most marginalised. Whether it needs, you can have a local version of that. Whether I don't know. I haven't thought that through. I haven't got a view on that really. What I do know is that the average wages in Cornwall are significantly lower. I think something like I think it was 85, 75. It's low, lowest, and sometimes having those national wage scales in jobs like that, particularly in the public sector, is really helpful for Cornwall. So I don't know the answer to that one. I think that will develop in time as we are thinking around it. But I think in principle, it's a really good idea.
Okay, thanks. Lukas.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what most of the others have said. I think in terms of the question, if you look at the donut, you have this ring in the middle, which is the social foundation. So it's almost by definition saying you need to have something in the economy that makes sure that everybody can have all the bits that are in the middle of the donut. And I think I think it's a bit debated at the moment what kind of shape that will take. So universal basic income is very prominent in the discussion, where it would be you give people the money to buy these kind of things, but there's also proposals for universal basic services where you just have very generous public services, more generous than you have at the moment, or things like a job guarantee where you give everybody a job, and there are different pros and cons for various different ways. But I think it's really important also, given that what we have to do is a massive economic transformation that we have to do quite quickly, and there's going to be people falling through the cracks, and it's not going to go as smoothly. So we have to make sure that really nobody is left behind, and I think that's why it's quite important to have some kind of better safety net than what we've got at the moment. Yeah, to make sure that everybody gets the kind of basics that are in the middle of the donut.
Thanks, Clara.
Hi. Yeah, so I was going, well, you Lukas, you jumped in there. I was going to bring up universal basic services as an idea, not just universal basic income, knowing that there are just some basic things that everybody is entitled to in a just society. That I think that there is a little bit of an anxiety in a lot of quarters about if you just give people money, why would they work? You know, and that's a very real fear, because people are doing a lot of work that they know is meaningless, that they don't like, that doesn't enrich them or what, you know, the society at large. David Graeber, the anthropologist and anarchist activist, was very good on his, I can't say the title of his book, but Bull Jobs. But he spoke very eloquently about this expansion of work, you know, with all of this automation and things getting more and more and more efficient. We're very productive, we're very efficient. What's happened? Why is everybody working really hard at things that they don't like? Well, it's because there are all these jobs out there that it's been swallowed up. I love the idea of a universal basic income. You know, the instead of benefiting just a smaller and smaller elite number of people that this capitalist society does seem to do, but spreading out the benefit and making sure everybody in our society can benefit and have an income and have the rights to a thriving life, I think would be wonderful. I'd like to learn more about it, and I think that there are definitely going to be some things to bump up against. You know, what happens when you just give people money and say you don't have to work? What happens to all of those services that people rely on that are quite unpleasant? So we do have to think about these things, but it's well worth having it on the table and making sure that it's considered. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Molly.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and we've sort of heard some of the discussion around it here, but I think it's right that we won't be able to stay within the planetary limit unless we cut that connection between survival and the need for a job. I'm going to explain why that's the case in a second, but I just wanted to quickly say back to Clara that there have been quite a few pilot studies conducted now, and they show that people do continue to work when they receive a basic income, but they have much higher levels of better mental health, and they're not forced to take all those crap jobs that David Graeber was talking about. And they have to get paid more to do crap jobs as well. So that's an advantage in my view. But the point is about, this is a 19th century equation, right? That if you don't go and work in a factory, you're going to starve. That's where it started out. And then socialism came along and said, no, that's not right. We're going to organize, we're going to make sure people can survive. We're going to have welfare benefits for people who don't have jobs. All well and good. But that's still within a system that says you have to work in order to survive. And within that system, it absolutely makes sense to generate pointless activity in order to make sure people have jobs. So if we think about the last time we had the Great Depression, Keynes himself got involved in making, like he said, you know, you have to dig holes and fill them up again, just so people aren't out of work. But we have to find a way to make sure people can survive without having to have the jobs that create all the destructive activity. Another example, during the COVID pandemic, the Chancellor was complaining about people not driving in their cars, producing carbon dioxide, going into a city, sitting in a cafe, risking getting COVID to buy a sandwich, but rather sitting at home making their own sandwich and not producing all that pollution, because they were destroying the jobs of other people in pret-a-manger. Now that's completely mad, right? But within the context of our existing economy, that makes sense. And the only way to move on from it is to make sure that everybody has that basic security, so you don't feel cruel because you're cutting economic growth and all the consequent emissions and destruction because you're depriving somebody else of a job. So understanding that people firstly don't have to go to work in order to justify their human existence, but can just like have a wonderful time and flourish as human beings, and shouldn't have to have that income in order to be able to survive, is absolutely crucial to getting out of the growth economy. Because a lot of what the growth economy is doing is just generating those jobs so other people don't starve. At the base level, that's part of the growth dynamic. And universal basic income has been a Green Party policy from the beginning in order to remove that dynamic within the economy. And just as a final point, I completely agree with what, it was Lukas, wasn't it, said this, that we're going to go through an economic transition now, actually because of COVID, but also because of climate change and because of automation. And in that process, some people will not be able to guarantee to have basic security through employment. And this is why the big digital entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and so on support the universal basic income. I mean, also because they want to exploit people, but leaving that part aside, they understand that we're going to go through really significant economic turbulence now. And the best way to support people and protect people through that is to provide them with a universal basic income. So I hope I've explained why it's also crucial to living within the planetary limit, but to me, it absolutely is. So I would say if you're a fan of Donought Economics, you know, do investigate universal basic income a bit more. I don't know if Kate Raworth proposes it as an essential part of the programme, but I really think she should.
Yeah, there have been a couple of comments that it actually doesn't feature in her book, so I think that's why some people were asking about it. Okay, well, coming out close to the end, I'm going to ask a final question, which is about alternative currencies creating change in a capitalist economy. And I'm pretty sure there's a Stroud pound, so I think we need to start with Molly on that one.
I've got a picture of me wearing a bowler hat, standing outside the shop with my signature on the Stroud pound. I could bring you a huge Stroud pound with my signature on because I was a banker for a little while. It was very interesting, but ultimately it failed, and that's because of Gresham's law. I don't agree with many laws in economics, but this one I agree with, and it says that good money drives out bad. It's not a moral judgment about, because obviously the Stroud pound was the most morally good currency ever created. It even had Laurie Lee on the tenner, but it's about which currency people believe in and which is most solid. Now, we only made the Stroud pound solid by linking it to pound sterling, and that tells you that we thought pound sterling was a more secure currency. But I think our economy wasn't large enough here to generate the sort of multipliers we needed to keep that pound in circulation, and people always preferred to swap it back for the pound because they believed in the pound. But the thing is, I can certainly imagine a scenario where the pound comes under pressure, or because of climate change related disruption, we can't get access to banking facilities. I mean, imagine, for example, that 10 years ago, we were like hours away from this scenario. You go to the cash point, you put your card in, no money comes out. Now in that scenario, suddenly everybody wants the Stroud pounds, and we've got £50,000 worth of them under somebody's bed over there. So I can imagine a situation in which we might have to bring those out again. And I would hope that as we move towards a net zero carbon economy, people understand why having a local pound and spending it in your local economy benefits the local economy, whereas having a pound that then gets sucked out and put in a hedge fund in London is destroying a local economy. But I have to tell you that from our attempts to get the Stroud pound going here, the temptation of pound sterling was too strong for us, and it beat us. But I'm not sure that the parameters will necessarily remain the same on that forever.
We've got a couple of minutes left, so does anybody else want to come in on this? Yeah, Clara.
I do. I love local currencies. We've never had a Cambridge pound, but we have a Cambridge lets. We have lets is a local, what is it? Local trading currency. Everything in the system adds up to zero. It's only created at the point of trade. It's a really interesting idea. Our scheme has been going on since 1993. I wouldn't say that it's like it's a hugely like generating a lot of wealth, but it's certainly really, really fun and strengthens the community. There's some, it's an idea, timeshares and lets, and there's a bunch of other ones that are kind of metric currencies. So they're not sort of attached to a pound. It's not a fiat currency. You don't, it doesn't have value because you say that it does and everybody has to believe in it. It's just created at the trade. You can go into negative, you can be positive, it doesn't matter. There have been some really good schemes. There's one in Kenya, the Bangladesh slum, where it allows the residents to trade for things that they need. The people that live there, they don't have access to the normal currencies, but they have time on their hands, they have muscle, they can get what they need from their neighbors and from the local businesses. So that's been going on for a few years. There's also a lot of schemes in Switzerland where it's called the Zipvorgorge. I can't pronounce it, but it literally means time provision, and people are trading. It's kind of care time credits. So there's some really, really exciting things. I don't think all of the potential has been released yet, but yeah, it's really worth kind of looking at. In Donought Economics, there is a little bit of a bit on alternative currencies for generating local wealth and local resilience, and I think it's a powerful idea.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there because we've run out of time. So a huge thank you to our speakers, to Clara, Edwina, Lukas, Imane, and to our panelist Molly. You've done a superb job. I found it really, really stimulating and informative and challenging. And I can see there's a huge amount to do, and it's been a fantastic day. And I hope all the participants have really enjoyed it and learned and got a huge amount to take away. Thank you also very much to Kate for organizing it, because Kate did all the organization. That was a big task, which she took on and did very well. And thank you all for coming, if you have been, for coming and listening. I think it's been a great afternoon. So thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.